My name is Melissa Carter, and last Thanksgiving changed everything I thought I knew about family. I hadn't been home to Savannah Shores, Georgia in 12 years. I'd built a good life in Austin, Texas, an engineer's salary, a cozy apartment downtown, friends who actually listened when I spoke. Still, every November, a part of me wondered if I'd ever be welcome back at my parents' table. So, last year, I booked the flight. I told myself it was time to heal old wounds, to walk through that front door as the woman I'd become, not the awkward girl they used to ignore. I even rehearsed what I'd say when they asked about my job. I'm leading infrastructure projects across 3 states, I'd begin, casual but proud. I pictured mom smiling, dad nodding, my brother joking that I'd finally made it. But that's not what happened. When I arrived, the air smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon. The house looked the same, white siding, porch swing, the faint creak of the screen door. But the warmth I remembered wasn't there. Mom opened the door wearing her favorite cranberry sweater. She gave me that polite half-hug people give coworkers, not daughters. Dad grunted from his recliner without looking up from the football game. My brother Ethan came in from the kitchen with a beer in his hand. "Hey, stranger," he said. His wife Lena waved, but didn't move from her spot by the stove. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "It's good to be home." They didn't answer. Dinner smelled amazing. Brown sugar ham, cornbread, stuffing, sweet potatoes, but the tension was thick enough to chew. I tried small talk, work, Austin weather, travel delays. Nobody bit. When we finally sat down, I noticed something strange. The dining table had 6 chairs, 1 for each of them, plus 2 for the grandkids. But there was no chair for me. "Where should I sit?" I asked, forcing a smile. Mom didn't even glance up from her carving knife. She said, "We didn't expect you'd stay long." Her tone was mild, but the words sliced clean through me. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misheard. The room went still except for the ticking wall clock. Then Dad set his fork down, looked straight at me, and said, "You don't belong at this table." Every sound in the room vanished. Even the kids stopped giggling. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, sharp and loud. I'd come home to make peace, not to be erased again. My hands shook as I stood up. I could feel their eyes on me, judging, indifferent, maybe even relieved that I was leaving. And then the words spilled out before I could stop them. "Then stop using the money I sent to keep this house." Silence. Real silence. The kind that hums in your ears. Mom's knife froze midair. Ethan blinked. Dad's jaw tightened. I didn't wait for their response. I grabbed my coat, walked to the door, and said, "If I don't belong here, fine. But you don't get to live off the daughter you threw away." The screen door slammed behind me. Cold salt air hit my face, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt angry and alive. If your family's ever made you feel like you didn't belong, share it below. I read every story. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself, even when your voice was shaking, hit subscribe. Because this story isn't over. You're about to hear how I took my power back. As I drove away from that glowing little house by the shore, my hands still trembled on the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to scream. But mostly, I just wanted to be done feeling small. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of something I should have done years ago. The night I finally stopped asking to be loved by people who only loved the version of me that stayed quiet. When I pulled out of my parents' driveway that night, I drove straight to the old overlook by the bay, the place where I used to sit as a teenager when I needed to breathe. The waves crashed against the rocks, the same rhythm I'd listened to through 100 lonely nights. Back then, I'd thought leaving Savannah Shores would fix everything. Turns out, distance doesn't erase the echo of not being enough. I grew up in that little coastal town where everyone knew everyone and everyone knew who the good Carters were. My dad, Richard, was a retired Navy man, disciplined, loud, never wrong. My mom, Diane, worked at the local library, gentle with strangers but sharp with me. And then there was Ethan, 3 years older, the golden boy who could do no wrong. He played quarterback, dated the mayor's daughter, got his picture in the paper for future leaders of Savannah Shores. And me? I was the girl who built robots in the garage, the one teachers praised but my parents shrugged at. She's just different, Mom would say, with a half smile that wasn't really a smile. Ethan's the people person. Melissa, she likes her little gadgets. Dad would laugh, not cruelly, just dismissively, like my dreams were cute, not serious. I still remember the day I won first place in the regional science fair. I came home holding my trophy, glowing with pride. Mom was icing a cake for Ethan's ball game banquet. She looked up and said, "That's nice, honey. Don't forget to clean up the garage when you're done." I stood there, clutching that plastic trophy, feeling like it didn't weigh anything at all. Dinner that night was loud with laughter about Ethan's big game. Nobody asked about my project. When I tried to speak, Dad said, "Not now, Mel, let your brother finish." So I stopped trying. That became the pattern. Every time I reached for attention, someone else's story drowned mine out. Ethan crashed Dad's truck once, and they all laughed it off. When I accidentally knocked over a vase, Mom sighed like I'd broken her heart. I learned early that being invisible hurt less than being compared. By high school, I was eating most dinners in my room. I told them I had homework, but really, I just couldn't stand the noise of being ignored. I'd sit at my desk, headphones in, building small circuits, dreaming about cities where people might see me for what I could do. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Becker, was the first person who said the words I'll never forget. "You're not too much, Melissa. You're just in the wrong place." Those words became my lifeline. At 18, when the acceptance letter came from the University of Texas in the mail, I felt like I could finally breathe. But when I told my parents, they looked more confused than proud. Mom frowned. "Texas? That's so far. Why can't you stay closer to home like Ethan did?" Dad muttered, "Don't go chasing things that'll just disappoint you." I packed anyway. Leaving home felt like walking out of a fog. The highway stretched endless and bright, and I promised myself I'd never need their approval again. But promises are funny things. They fade when you miss the sound of someone saying your name with love. College was hard, but at least the rules were fair. Work hard, earn respect. I pulled all-nighters, lived on instant noodles, and graduated top of the class. My first job was at a construction tech startup where nobody cared that I was different. They just cared that I got things done. Still, every few months, I'd call home. Old habits die slow. "Hey, Mom," I'd say. She'd ask if I was eating right, then pivot to Ethan's new promotion, Ethan's new house, Ethan's perfect kids. Dad's voice in the background, sharp with impatience. Once I said, "I just got a raise, project manager now." Mom answered, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Ethan's building a deck in his backyard?" I hung up smiling, then cried after. People talk about homesickness like it's missing a place, but sometimes it's missing a version of yourself that still believed you'd be welcome home. So I built a life in Austin. Steady job, a circle of friends, a golden retriever named Max, weekend hikes. Outwardly, I was thriving. Inside, I carried the same small ache that started at that dinner table when I was 10, watching my brother bask in attention while I stared at my untouched plate. When you grow up unseen, you learn to celebrate quietly. You clap for yourself because no one else will. But even the strongest people get tired of clapping alone. And that's how 12 years later, I found myself booking that Thanksgiving flight. Not to beg for love, but to see if maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me. For a long time, I told myself it didn't matter, that some families just don't know how to show love. I convinced myself that as long as I worked hard, made money, and stayed kind, the ache would fade. But it didn't. It just got quieter. The kind of quiet that hums in your bones. By my late 20s, things were finally falling into place. I'd worked my way up from intern to project manager at a tech-driven construction firm in Austin. I oversaw entire city projects, bridges, transport hubs, high-rise structures. I was proud, not just of the work, but of how I'd built everything from scratch. No family name, no backup plan, no safety net. Just grit. When I got my first six-figure paycheck, I stared at it for a long time. I didn't buy anything flashy. Instead, I wired a portion to an old family friend in Savannah Shores, Mrs. Thompson, our former neighbor. I asked her to deliver it anonymously to my parents. "Tell them it's from a community donor," I said. She laughed softly over the phone. "You sure about this, sweetheart?" "I'm sure," I told her. "They don't need to know it's me." That was the beginning of a pattern I kept for 3 years. Every month, I sent $1,200 through Mrs. Thompson to cover my parents' utilities and groceries. When Ethan wanted to open a small auto repair garage, I sent $30,000. His angel investor, he called it. He bragged about it all over town. I saw a photo of the shop opening on Facebook. My parents were there, smiling wide, arms around Ethan and his wife. The caption said, "So proud of our boy for chasing his dreams." I stared at that post for a long time, the screen burning into my eyes. I'd made that dream possible, and still, I was invisible. I remember calling home that week. Mom picked up. "Hey, it's me," I said. "Oh, Melissa. Sorry, honey, I'm in the middle of something. Did you hear about Ethan's new shop? It's going great." "I did," I said quietly. "That's actually why I called." "Well, isn't that sweet? Anyway, I'll call you later, okay? Love you." The line went dead. That night, I sat on my balcony, watching Austin's skyline glow like a field of stars. Below me, cars hummed and people laughed from a nearby bar. It should have felt like success, but it didn't. Because no matter how high I climbed, my parents only looked up long enough to point at Ethan's sky. Anger has a slow burn. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Why aren't you enough? Every holiday I skipped, every voicemail I deleted, every maybe next year when Mom invited Ethan and not me, it built a wall inside me. A wall made of disappointment, resentment, and a small, poisonous hope that maybe someday they'd call just to say, "We're proud of you." But they never did. When my father retired from his Navy position, they threw a neighborhood party. I found out through social media again. Ethan gave a toast, Mom beamed, Dad laughed like he'd won the lottery. My name wasn't mentioned once, not even in passing. I told my best friend Carla, a software engineer I'd met at work. She listened quietly, then said, "You keep giving them pieces of yourself, Mel, but they never look up to see you bleeding." Her words hit like a gut punch. Still, I defended them. "They're just old-fashioned. They don't mean to hurt me." Carla sighed. Intent doesn't erase impact. After that, I tried to distance myself. Fewer calls, fewer payments. But then Dad's health declined. The roof on their old house leaked. Ethan's garage hit a slow season. And like clockwork, I stepped in again. Because that's what love looked like to me. Giving until it hurt, then calling it duty. Every transfer I made was a silent plea. Notice me. Say thank you. Say anything. Instead, I got updates about Ethan's kids, his boat, his vacation to Myrtle Beach. By the time I turned 32, the resentment had hardened. When you spend years doing everything right and still get treated like a ghost, something inside you starts to snap. Not loudly, but cleanly, like a branch that's had enough weight for too long. So when Thanksgiving rolled around and that invitation finally came, a short text from Mom that just said,
"You should come this year." I thought maybe this was it. Maybe they'd finally see me. But I didn't know that the anger I'd buried was about to surface in a way none of us could take back.
The week before Thanksgiving, I packed my bags like I was preparing for a mission instead of a visit. Every shirt folded neatly, every gift chosen carefully. For Mom, a sleek coffee maker that ground beans automatically because she'd always said she hated the noise of old ones. For Dad, a personalized toolkit engraved with, "To the man who built everything I know." For Ethan and his wife, a voucher for a mountain getaway, since they were so stressed from the garage. It wasn't about showing off. It was about effort, the kind that love used to require. The drive to Savannah Shores took 9 hours. Every mile felt like rewinding a movie I wasn't sure I wanted to watch again. By the time I pulled up to my parents' house, my stomach was tight enough to hurt. The same white fence, the same wind chimes, the same porch swing, all exactly as I'd left them. Only the air felt different, heavier. Mom opened the door. Her smile was polite, her hug quick. "You made it," she said, like I was an unexpected guest, not her daughter. Dad appeared behind her, hands in his pockets. "Traffic bad?" "Not too bad," I said, trying to sound cheerful. Inside, the house smelled like roasted turkey and pine candles. Warm, familiar, dangerous. Ethan and his wife were already there, fussing over their kids who were running circles around the living room. I set my gifts under the tree, straightened my jacket, and told myself, just get through dinner. At first, I tried to join in, small talk about my drive, about Austin, about work, but every sentence I started, someone ended. Mom interrupted to praise Ethan's new business contract. Dad laughed about how Ethan always finds a way. Even the kids got more attention than I did. I kept smiling, nodding, trying to pretend it didn't sting. We decorated the tree together, or rather, I tried to. When I mentioned a software project I'd led, Mom murmured, "That sounds complicated, dear," then turned to help Ethan's daughter hang an ornament. I stood there, holding a strand of tinsel that suddenly felt like a lifeline. The sound of laughter from the others filled the room, bouncing off the walls that once held my childhood. And that's when I realized I wasn't really in this house anymore. Not as a daughter, not as part of them. I was just a visitor they tolerated out of habit. When we finally sat down for dinner, I saw it. The missing chair. 6 seats, none for me. A simple mistake would have been fine, but I knew it wasn't. The plates were already set, the napkins folded evenly. It was deliberate. My throat tightened. "Where should I sit?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. Mom didn't look up. "We didn't expect you to stay long." Dad's eyes were cold steel. "You've got your own life now, Mel. You walked away." Ethan stayed quiet, staring at his plate. In that moment, something inside me cracked. Quietly, almost politely. Years of small wounds, swallowed words, invisible effort. All of it pressed down until I could barely breathe. I wanted to say, I called, I sent money, I tried. But I couldn't get the words out because deep down I knew the truth. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to buy a seat at a table that was never meant for me. So I smiled, that brittle kind of smile you give when you're breaking inside. I said, "I'll just stand." And I did. Through the meal, through the laughter that wasn't mine, through the ache that filled every empty space in that house. That night, lying in the guest room, surrounded by old trophies and faded photos of Ethan's glory days, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, maybe they were right. Maybe I really don't belong here. It was the loneliest thought I had ever had.
The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds like nothing had happened. The house was already alive with noise. Dishes clattering, kids laughing, football commentary from the TV. I stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the railing, watching my family move around each other with the ease of people who belong. For a moment, I almost believed I could slip back into that rhythm. Maybe if I smiled hard enough, helped with breakfast, or stayed quiet, I could pretend the night before hadn't cut so deep. But pretending was something I'd done my whole life, and I was done with it. When Mom saw me, she said, "Morning, sweetheart. Coffee?" Her voice was light, as if the dinner table humiliation never happened. "Sure," I said, sitting at the counter. She poured a cup and slid it toward me without looking up. Ethan and his wife were laughing about something the kids said. Dad sat in his recliner, newspaper in one hand, remote in the other. The same picture of authority I'd known since childhood. I stared into my coffee, watching the cream swirl like storm clouds. The silence around me wasn't loud this time. It was calm, almost peaceful. I realized something simple, but life-changing. I didn't need their approval to exist. Still, I had one thing left to say. "Mom," I started quietly, "why didn't you save me a seat last night?" She froze for a second, then smiled like I was being dramatic. "Oh, honey, don't take it that way. You know we love you." Dad grunted from the living room. "You left us, Mel. You can't just waltz back in and expect everything to be the same." Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "Yeah, we barely hear from you. You chose your fancy job over family." Something inside me snapped, but not in anger this time. It was something cleaner, sharper, a final click after years of silence. I stood up slowly. "You think I left you?" No one answered. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling but steadying with every word. "I didn't leave. I called, I texted, I sent money for years. I paid your bills, Mom. I covered the mortgage when you fell behind. I helped Ethan open that garage she's so proud of. You all just never bothered to ask where the help came from." The room went still. Ethan's jaw slackened. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the $25,000 you used to buy your first lift. You think some random community donor believed in you that much? That was me." Mom set her cup down too hard. "Melissa, that's not funny." "It's not a joke," I said softly. "Check your accounts. I sent every payment through Mrs. Thompson because I didn't want your pity. I just wanted you to be okay." For the first time in years, no one had anything to say. Dad's paper hung mid-air. Mom's lips parted, but no words came out. Ethan's wife stared at the floor. Even the kids sensed something heavy and went quiet. And then Mom whispered, "Why didn't you tell us?" I laughed. Not bitterly, just tired. Because when I tried to tell you about my life, you talked over me. When I succeeded, you changed the subject. When I called, you didn't answer. So I stopped asking to be seen. My voice didn't shake anymore. It was calm, certain, alive. "I'm done trying," I said, my voice steady. "You don't have to love me, but you don't get to use me anymore." I turned toward the door, the morning light wrapping around me like armor. Behind me, Mom called my name, her voice breaking. But I didn't turn back. Because for the first time, I wasn't walking away to escape them. I was walking toward myself. I didn't slam the door when I left that morning. I didn't raise my voice or throw anything dramatic into the air. I just stepped outside, into the crisp, salt wind off the Atlantic, and let it carry away the noise. Behind me, I heard Mom's voice, thin, uncertain, calling my name. But I kept walking. For once, silence was mine to keep. The SUV I'd rented gleamed in the driveway, sunlight catching its black paint. I stood there for a moment, my breath visible in the cold, my heart strangely calm.
I thought about how I had spent years trying to earn my way into that house. Now, walking away from it, I finally felt like I owned something, myself. I opened the driver's door, but before I got in, I heard the screen door creak. Ethan stepped out, hands shoved in his pockets. His voice was low. "Mel, wait." I turned. He looked older than I remembered. Lines on his forehead, a slump in his shoulders that wasn't there before. "Was it really you, the money for the shop?" "Yes," I said. His eyes fell. "I didn't know." "I know," I said quietly. "That's the point." He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something more, but no words came. Behind him, Mom stood at the doorway, holding her mug like a shield. Dad lingered in the background, eyes hard, but softer than before. Maybe guilt, maybe just pride trying not to crumble. "You could have told us," Ethan said finally. I shook my head. "And what would that have changed? You would have thanked me once, maybe twice, then gone back to pretending I didn't exist." He winced, but didn't deny it. The truth had weight, heavy, but honest. I wasn't there to punish them. I was there to end a cycle that had drained every ounce of me. I walked to the porch steps and placed a small envelope on the railing. Inside were copies of the transfer records, one for each year I'd sent money home. I wanted them to see, not to humiliate them, but to remind them that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet check that keeps the lights on, the sacrifice no one applauds. I took one last look at that house, the chipped paint, the sagging porch, the wind chimes tingling like ghosts of old laughter, and said softly, "Take care of each other. I'm done being the reason you survive." Then I got in the car and drove away. No tears, no anger, just release. As the town faded behind me, the grocery store, the church, the rusted water tower, I felt lighter. For the first time, the ache in my chest wasn't from longing, it was from letting go. 3 weeks later, I heard from Mrs. Thompson. She said Ethan's garage had started struggling without my monthly support. The bank called in one of his loans and he had to sell some equipment. My parents cut back on expenses, but pride kept them from asking for help. I didn't gloat, I didn't post about it, didn't call to say I told you so, because this wasn't revenge. It was balance, life returning to its rightful order. At night, in my apartment back in Austin, I'd sit on my balcony with a glass of wine. Carla came over one evening, tossing me a blanket. "How do you feel?" she asked. I smiled, a small, real smile. "Free," I said, "and for once, I don't feel guilty about it." She nodded. "That's what healing sounds like." And maybe it was, because the silence that used to hurt now felt like peace. The quiet no longer meant I was invisible. It meant I was finally home. A few months passed after that Thanksgiving, and life slowly settled into something quiet, steady, and, finally, mine. The world didn't change overnight, but something inside me did. The noise in my head, that endless echo of "you're not enough," grew fainter until it disappeared. Savannah Shores became a memory I didn't have to hate anymore. I didn't block my family, but I stopped waiting for their messages. I let silence be the boundary it needed to be. I heard through Mrs. Thompson that my parents were managing, barely, but managing. They'd cut back on cable, started tending a small vegetable garden out back. Ethan kept the garage open for a while, but when a slow season hit, he sold it and took a job as a mechanic at another shop in town. He never called, never wrote, but neither did I. At first, I thought I'd feel guilty. I didn't. What I felt was something unfamiliar. Peace. Back in Austin, the rhythm of my days began to heal me. I'd wake early, walk Max by the river, watch the morning sun paint the glass towers gold. Work was busy, but not overwhelming. My team respected me. My friends saw me. And every night when I locked the door behind me, I knew that whatever waited inside, books, music, silence, was mine. One Friday evening, I got home to find a letter in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting instantly. Elegant, looping, careful. For a long time, I didn't open it. I poured tea, fed Max, Sat on the couch with the envelope resting in my lap like a weight I wasn't sure I wanted to carry again. When I finally tore it open, the letter was short. Melissa, we didn't know what we were doing all those years. You were always the strong one, and we mistook your silence for distance. I'm sorry for the way we made you feel. Love, Mom. No excuses, no explanations, just that. I folded the letter back into its envelope and stared out at the city lights. Part of me wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come. Because this wasn't about forgiveness, it was about understanding. She couldn't undo the past, but for the first time, she'd seen me clearly enough to write it down. That was enough. Later that week, I met Carla for coffee. She leaned across the table and said, "You seem different." "I am," I said. "I stopped trying to earn love that should have been freely given." She smiled. "That's growth." I laughed softly. It's peace disguised as growth. There's this myth we tell ourselves that family love is automatic, unconditional, and owed. But the truth is, not every family knows how to love without strings. And when they can't, it doesn't mean we're broken. It just means we learned how to build something different, something our own hands could hold. Sometimes I still think about that dinner table, the empty chair that wasn't set for me. I used to picture it with anger. Now I see it a space I've filled somewhere else, in friendships, in work, in quiet evenings spent being exactly who I am. When you grow up in the shadow of other people's approval, you learn to chase worth like a finish line. But one day you realize there's no medal for endurance in pain. There's only the moment you decide to stop running and rest in who you are. That's what that Thanksgiving gave me. Not closure, not revenge, just clarity. I don't know if my parents and I will ever share another meal. Maybe someday, maybe not. But I do know this. I'll never beg for a seat again. I'll build my own table, invite people who see me, and leave a chair open for the version of myself that never stopped trying. If you've ever felt unseen by the people who should have known you best, you're not alone. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to give endlessly to prove you belong. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away and still choose to love yourself anyway. Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. And if the story stayed with you, hit subscribe. Because next week, I'm sharing how I learned to rebuild from nothing and why peace isn't found in forgiveness, but in finally being free.